and just some of the other people that are on the meeting. So I'm Sarah Edinburgh, and I'm a hydrogeologist with Montana DEQ, and I'm also the project manager for the Colstrip Ash Pond project. Also on the phone, we have Terry Mavenkamp. She is the Contaminated Site Cleanup Bureau Chief. We also have Rebecca Harbidge, who I don't even know if you introduced yourself, but she is our Public Policy Director. We have Jenny Chambers, who is the DEQ Waste Management and Remediation Division Administrator. And then we have Nick Whitaker and Ed Hayes on from DEQ Legal. And in addition to that, we also have Gordon Criswell from Talon, Montana, and Gordon is going to give part of this presentation along with me. So with that, I will get started. So I just kind of wanted to go over the topics we're going to cover tonight. As Rebecca said, it's kind of a lot. So we'll do our best to take our time and make sure everyone gets a good understanding of what's going on at the site. But first, I'll just give some background and an overview of our AOC, or Administrative Order on Consent, that process. I'll go through the reports that have been previously approved, and I'll give an update on the financial assurance. We'll then get into the Units 3 and 4 Remedy Evaluation Report and the selection of corrective measures. And that part, Gordon Criswell from Talon is going to cover. We'll then get into the Units 1 and 2 Remediation Plan overview. This plan was required under the Coal-Fired Generating Unit Remediation Act. And I'll explain what that is, because it's actually a separate thing from our AOC. And then from there, I'll get into the Units 1 and 2 Integrated Remedy Evaluation Report overview. And so that's one of the documents that's out for public comment right now that covers the remedial options for the 1 and 2 pond area. And then I'll wrap it up with just kind of what to expect next, and we'll open it up for questions and comments at the end. And we will have a couple of breaks kind of in between this stuff for questions too, just to kind of break it up a little bit. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but what is coal ash? It's also known as coal combustion residual, or CCR, and it's the byproduct of burned coal. And so it may contain traces of metals that are naturally present in the coal. It's on the federal level, it's regulated by the federal CCR rule, or coal combustion residual rule. And CCR is generally about 10% of the total coal mass that's burned. And it's kind of separated into two separate categories. So there's fly ash, which is the stuff that goes up the stack and gets caught by the scrubber system. And then there's also bottom ash, and that's ash that falls to the bottom of the boiler. And so it's much coarser grained than the fly ash. The CCR rule regulates both fly ash and bottom ash. And so it encompasses disposal, pond construction, monitoring wells, closure requirements, etc. It's not considered hazardous waste under the coal combustion residual rule. And I should note that, this is a rule that is under EPA, and so DEQ does not actually enforce the CCR rule, but we do consider the requirements when we're choosing a remedy and going through this process to make sure that the remedy complies with all the federal regulations. So getting into our Administrative Order on Consent, or AOC. So this was an enforcement action from DEQ, and it was signed in 2012, and it was designed to address the groundwater contamination from the coal ash disposal ponds at the Colstrip Steam Electric Station. So the AOC divides the site into 3 areas. So we've got the plant site, Units 1 and 2 evaporation ponds, and then the Units 3 and 4 effluent holding ponds. And I'll show a map on the next slide of what that covers. But these 3 areas were also designed to encompass all the pipelines that transport the slurry to the ponds. So this next slide shows these AOC areas. And so we have the plant site in here, we have the Units 1 and 2 area here, and then the Units 3 and 4 area over here. And just to kind of orient yourself, the town of Colstrip is here, and then Castle Rock Lake. Okay, so I will take you through the AOC process. And so we go through this process for each one of the 3 areas. So there's a site characterization report for the plant site, the 1 and 2, and the 3 and 4 ponds. This follows a pretty typical remediation process that you'd see at other sites in Montana. So it starts with the site characterization report, which describes the current condition of each area. So it goes through the hydrogeology, the geology, pond history, well data, all that kind of background stuff. After that's completed, we go to the cleanup criteria and risk assessment report, and that identifies the constituents of interest, the risk for exposure to both human health and the environment to those contaminants, and then it determines the cleanup criteria for those contaminants. So, you know, what concentrations do we need to meet when we clean the site up. After that, we go to the remedy evaluation report, and that is the part that evaluates the remediation alternatives. And I should note here the little stars next to these 3 reports, and there's one on the next slide too, but those indicate that we solicit public comment for those reports. And so DEQ reviews the remedy evaluation report and selects the remedy. So DEQ, under the AOC, has the authority to choose the remedy. After DEQ selects a remedy, financial assurance is required to be submitted for the selected remedy. After that, we go to the remedial design phase. And so these are kind of all the technical engineering documents and design plans and things like that for that remedy that's been selected by DEQ. And when it's all said and done, Talon would submit a final remedial action report describing the completed remedy. The facility closure plans, the facility closure plans describe the long-term maintenance and monitoring in addition to how the ponds will actually be closed. These also, public comment gets solicited on these as well. These are a little out of order in these slides because the way that AOC was written, those facility closure plans had to be submitted within 5 years of the AOC being signed. So those plans were actually submitted in August 2017. And upon approval of those, financial assurance also has to get submitted for closure actions. Oh, I'm seeing some people in the waiting room here. Sorry, I'm just admitting some people. Okay. Okay, so getting into the summary of where we are in this AOC process. So of the for the 3 areas, plant site units 1 and 2 and units 3 and 4, we've completed all the site characterization reports. We've completed a background screening level report. This actually wasn't required under the AOC, but we Talon did a pretty extensive background report just to kind of document background conditions, and some of those background concentrations ended up becoming cleanup levels. So that's why that was done. We've completed the cleanup criteria and risk assessment reports for all 3 areas. And now onto the remedy evaluation reports. So DEQ approved the remedy evaluation for the plant site area. We conditionally approved the remedy evaluation report for the units 3 and 4 area, and that happened in, let's see, March of this year, so March 2020. And we are currently under review of the remedy evaluation report for the units 1 and 2 area. And so my part of this meeting is going to be mostly focused on that, and that document is also out for public comment as well. The remedial design, remedial action reports have been completed for the plant site, and they're under review in units 3 and 4. There's actually a few reports that get submitted for this. There's kind of a 30% design, a 60% design, so they kind of progress. And so some of those reports have been submitted for units 3 and 4, but the process isn't complete yet. The final remedial action report isn't going to be submitted until the remedies are all completed. So we've got a couple of years on those. And finally, the closure plans were conditionally approved by DEQ as well. So we've gotten a lot done in the last few years. Just a quick update on the financial assurance. So this presents an overview of the current financial assurance that's been provided by each of the owners. This covers pond closures for all of the ponds and the remedies for the plant site in the 3 and 4 areas. If you recall in the last slide, those are the reports that have been approved by DEQ. So really all we're missing is financial assurance, part of it, for the units 1 and 2 remedy. Once that remedy is chosen by DEQ, then all the financial assurance will be in place. I should note that I just kind of put an update on here between December and October. So the bold number, that 243.1 million, that is the current amount of financial assurance that we have as of now. Previously, the financial assurance provided as of December 15th, we had not yet approved the units 3 and 4 remedy evaluation report at that time. And we've also since gotten part of the financial assurance for the units 1 and 2 area. So that's why there's that difference there. So I'll just pause really quick because that's kind of all for the background. But if anyone had questions, you know, just kind of that background and how the AOC works and stuff, I can go through those now. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Gordon Criswell from Talon, Montana. And Gordon's going to go through the units 3 and 4 remedy evaluation report. So Gordon, if you want to, let's see, maybe I need to stop sharing my screen. Okay. I can see your screen, but I think you're muted.
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Sarah. Let me get the correct screen share up.
I'm seeing your notes, Gordon. I don't.
Okay, let me try to get this set up the right way. You know, I think, Sarah, we're just going to go through it this way, if that's all right with you.
Yep, that's fine with me.
Yeah, it'll show the next slide off to the right, but the main slide would be the big one. All right, Sarah's mentioned, I'm Gordon Criswell. I'm the Director of Environmental and Compliance at the Colstrip Power Plant. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining the meeting tonight and participating in this review. I'm going to be going over the Colstrip 3 and 4 Effluent Holding Pond CCR Rule Corrective Measures Assessment. As Sarah mentioned, we follow both the federal CCR rule requirements and the Colstrip wastewater AOC requirements. And we work the two together so that the corrective measures or the remedies that we put in place are achieving the requirements of both the AOC and the CCR rule. So one of the requirements under the CCR rule is that we conduct an assessment of corrective measures when our groundwater monitoring has indicated a statistically significant level above the groundwater protection standards as identified under the CCR rule. Our monitoring at Colstrip has identified that we've exceeded 2 of the groundwater protection standards at the 3 and 4 effluent holding pond. Those are for the parameters of lithium and cobalt. So we did initiate the assessment of corrective measures, which essentially was the similar effort that we were doing under the Colstrip wastewater AOC. Under that, it was called the remedy evaluation. So the assessment of corrective measures was placed on the Colstrip CCR public website in May of 2019. I got the link there for that, for those that would be interested in going out and reviewing that report. It's a pretty detailed report, and I'm just covering the high points of that here. The assessment of corrective measures provides an analysis of the effectiveness of those potential actions It needs to be protective of human health and the environment, attain the groundwater protection standards as identified under the CCR rule, identify the time required to begin and complete the remedy, and then discuss the results in a public meeting, which is what I'm doing now. As I mentioned, the key part of all the details behind that assessment of corrective measures is the AOC Remedy Evaluation Report. So that report has been submitted to MDEQ. They have reviewed that and provided conditional approval of the alternative 4 under that report. And you can go and find that report on DEQ's public website, which I've identified at the bottom of this slide. This is a similar picture to what Sarah had up, just pointing out where we're talking about. Under the AOC, there's 3 areas. What I'm talking about tonight is the units 3 and 4 effluent holding pond area. So located about 3 miles east of the power plant. The 3 and 4 effluent holding pond is comprised of several cells. The pond was built in a high point area with some dams along the 2 valleys to contain the ash material. Then the perimeter of the pond was installed a bentonite amended concrete cutoff wall down to bedrock. And that was to help prevent seepage. As I mentioned earlier, our monitoring system has identified that we have seepage from this area, and so we're needing to take corrective measures. We have a groundwater monitoring program that consists of several hundred monitoring wells, and we've initiated capture in this area to contain those impacts. And currently there are over almost 100 monitoring or capture wells in place to control those impacts. But I'll get into more details here in just a little bit. This is what the effluent holding pond looks like. Okay, we evaluated 5 potential corrective measures in the remedy evaluation report. Alternative 1 was what we call no further action. That really wasn't an alternative that we were considering to implement, but rather to provide a baseline condition. It includes the conditions at the pond as they existed in December of 2017, which included the 99 capture wells that were in service and the other lining and closure activities that had been in place at that time, but nothing else being done. It was mostly to provide a baseline. Alternative 2 then provided source control upgrades. Those were measures taken at the pond itself to address any seepage from the pond or the source. Alternative 3 included those source control upgrades, then along with some capture system upgrades. Alternative 4 included everything in alternative 3 with increased capture and the capture system upgrades, and then a freshwater flushing component to help the area clean up faster. And then alternative 5 was evaluated, which was a source removal alternative where a new landfill would be constructed. The material in the existing pond would be removed, placed in the new landfill, and additional capture was provided. As I mentioned earlier, the proposed corrective measure that's been conditionally approved by MDEQ is alternative 4. Get into some more details now on each of the alternatives. Alternative 1, again, no further action, but this was a baseline alternative just to compare the other alternatives to what would happen if we continued doing what we were doing as of December 2017, which included a forced evaporation system to eliminate water at the ponds, 99 capture wells, trenches, and sumps that were in service to capture the seepage that had occurred and return that back to the pond, keep it from spreading. And then a groundwater capture treatment system that takes that captured groundwater, treats it so that it can be used back in the plant. This alternative assumed that existing capture system would operate through 2050. Alternative 2, which is the source control upgrades, included a forced evaporation to eliminate the water in the ponds. It utilized the existing capture system to continue to operate through 2050. That's the 99 capture wells that were in place. It included the capture treatment system to treat that captured groundwater so it could be reused at the plant. It included a conversion to dry disposal at the effluent holding pond by July 1st of 2022. The effluent holding pond was closed in accordance with the MDEQ approved AOC closure plan and the CCR rule closure plan. Both of those are very similar, and the MDEQ approved the AOC closure plan. So it consists of a synthetic cap over the ponds once they've been dewatered, and then a soil cover placed on top of that, and then that soil vegetated. Alternate 2 also included a monitored natural attenuation component to be in place after the capture system is turned off in 2050. It included a permeable reactive barrier as a contingency plan. That's basically a system that's placed in the ground to address any localized areas that perhaps hadn't cleaned up as fast as the model indicated they would in the system. And then it also includes institutional controls that may be needed. An institutional control would be some kind of a limitation, for example, a limitation on the use of groundwater. So the impacts that we're seeing are on plant property. So an example of an institutional control would be us putting in place limitations on groundwater wells to be used, for example, for livestock in that area until it cleaned up to meet the criteria. Alternative 3 was source control with capture system upgrades. It has everything that was in alternative 2, the forced evaporation to eliminate water, the existing capture system operating through 2050, and then capture system upgrades to enhance that capture. Those upgrades included the effluent holding pond under drain system to be operated to help dewater the ash. The effluent holding pond was designed with a series of collection pipes under the ash at the bottom of the pond to do this. And it also included 5 new capture wells. As in the previous alternative, it included the groundwater capture treatment system, the conversion to dry disposal by July 1st of 22, and then closure of the effluent holding pond in accordance with the approved closure plans, which was synthetic caps with soil cover and vegetation. This alternative also included components of monitored natural attenuation, the permeable reactive barrier as a contingency if needed, and then institutional controls as needed. I'm going to jump to alternative 5 first, and then we'll follow up with alternative 4, which was the proposed corrective measure and the conditionally approved alternative by MDEQ. Alternative 5 was the source removal alternative. That's where we would construct a new landfill and then remove the existing material from the pond and place that in the new landfill. And it also included some additional capture. The components of that alternative included forced evaporation to eliminate the water, continued operation of the existing 99 capture wells through 2050, pumping the underdrain system to help dewater the ash, installing 5 new capture wells. As in the previous alternatives, the groundwater capture treatment system would be in place to treat the captured groundwater. The conversion to dry disposal was in place. With this alternative, we'd have to permit and construct a new landfill that was identified to be in the 3 and 4 effluent holding pond area, and then its own groundwater monitoring network would be installed. We would then remove the existing ash and relocate that to the new landfill. Because of the amount of material there, that process would take up to 10 years to complete. This alternative also included a monitored natural attenuation, a permeable reactive barrier as a contingency, and institutional controls. So now we'll move to alternative 4, which is the proposed corrective measure and the conditionally approved alternative by MDEQ. That includes source control, capture system upgrades with increased capture, and the biggest component here is the freshwater flushing. By flushing, injecting fresh water into the area, we're able to clean up the groundwater much quicker. And I'll get through some of the details here. The forced evaporation is still a component of this to eliminate the water from the pond. The existing 99 capture wells would continue to operate through 2050. And then the upgrades to the capture flushing system would include the underdrain system to help dewater the ash, installation of 54 freshwater flushing wells located at strategic positions as identified through the groundwater model to help clean up the groundwater more quickly. And then the installation of 27 new capture wells to better capture the impacted water and make sure that all the freshwater flushing is being captured. This alternative included a groundwater capture treatment system. The captured groundwater would be treated and reused back at the plants while they were operating. And once the plants were shut down permanently, the treatment system would treat the water so that it could be used as the freshwater flushing component, or a discharge permit would be obtained and the treated water would be discharged. This alternative also includes a conversion to dry disposal by July of 22, and then closure of the effluent holding pond in accordance with the MDEQ approved closure plans and the CCR rule closure plan, which are synthetic caps after the pond has been dewatered, and then that covered with soil and vegetation. This alternative also included a monitored natural attenuation component after the year 2050, when the modeling predicted that the groundwater would clean up. It also included permeable reactive barriers as a contingency if needed. All the alternatives were based on groundwater modeling from the hundreds of monitoring wells we have in the area. However, the actual performance of the alternative will be based on actual monitoring results from those wells. So that's why a permeable reactive barrier is identified as a contingency. If that monitoring indicates that, for example, one area may not have cleaned up as fast as the model indicated, then this corrective measure can be implemented to address that area. And then this alternative also includes institutional controls as needed. I want to talk a little bit about the effluent holding pond underdrain. Part of the conditional approval by MDEQ was that we conduct a pumping test on that underdrain system. The effluent holding pond underdrain is a series of collection pipes that are under the ash at the bottom of the pond. They were intended to assist with source dewatering, and under alternative 4, that source dewatering will be done in conjunction with the horizontal and vertical collection wells that are going to be installed beneath the effluent holding pond already. So we've got both horizontal, vertical, and the underdrain utilized to dewater the ash. So DEQ asked that we conduct a pumping test to verify the capability of that underdrain system to assist with the ash dewatering. That was part of the conditional approval. As part of that test, we installed 16 new monitoring wells and used 20 existing monitoring wells to evaluate that pumping test. That underdrain pump operated from August 3rd through August 19th this year at about 125 gallons per minute. And we were able to see more than 30 feet of drawdown in some of the wells that were installed in the ash. So these results indicate that the underdrain did perform as expected and as identified in alternative 4. The data collected from this test is also going to be used to update the groundwater model to help ensure its accuracy and predictions. And it will be included in a revised remedy evaluation report that will be submitted early next year. Under alternative 4, the effluent holding pond under drain is planned for operation in 2021, next year. This is a pretty busy slide, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think it gives a general overview of the components of alternative 4. I would encourage those that want to learn more to go to the MDEQ website and take a look at the remedy evaluation report, as it's got all the more detailed information in that. But this slide shows the pond is the kind of multi-sided red bounded area in the middle, right here. This series in here is the under drain system. The dark blue dots are existing capture wells. The purple triangles are going to be new capture wells, and the green squares are the freshwater injection. In addition to those, we've got some long horizontal capture wells and injection wells in the area that are strategically located based on the groundwater model to help meet the cleanup criteria. So to summarize, the proposed corrective measure, as I mentioned, is alternative 4, the source control with freshwater flushing and the capture system upgrades. It's per the modeling and the remedy evaluation report, it's determined to be the most effective alternative. It provides protection of human health and the environment. It's been conditionally approved by MDEQ. The schedule for this alternative will be to start the under drain dewatering system next year in 2021. We'll also start the increased capture well operation next year in 2021. Cells Delta and Echo of the pond will be closed in 2021, with closure of the other cells in the following years. The freshwater flushing system, wells and system, will be installed next year and will begin flushing in 2022. The capture freshwater flushing system then continues to operate through 2050. The estimated cost of alternative 4 is $154 million. So that ends my review of the corrective measures assessment for the 3 and 4 effluent holding pond. We can pause now and answer any questions that come up, or you can hold them till the end and we can answer questions at the end. With that, Sarah, I'm going to turn my screen back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Yeah, so we can take questions if anyone has anything now, or like Gordon said, we'll have about 30 minutes at the end for questions as well. And I'll just add to that, I did post the results of that under drain pumping test on the DEQ website as well. So if you want to check that out, that's also available. So.
Sarah, I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Okay. Well, we will move on then, but you know, again, if you think of something, we will have time at the end as well. So let me reshare.
Oh, we do have one now.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for this public meeting. My name is Mary Ann Dunwell. I happen to be a state representative. I represent Helena and East Helena and track these environmental remediation things. Maybe it's because my past life was spent in the remediation division. So I have a question. I prefer alternative 5, but I have a question about alternative 4. How long will the pumping continue, and what happens when the pumping is turned off? Won't the water rise again?
Yeah, so I can, unless Gordon, you want to chip in, but I can probably start off, and if you want to add to it.
Sure.
Yeah, 3 and 4 ponds, that's a good question. We looked really closely at those, and so the under drain will pump through about 2031, I believe is the date, and then that capture and injection system will operate until 2050. So we've got about 30 years of groundwater capture ahead of us there. The reason that we selected alternative 4 at this area is Talon demonstrated, and there's some cross sections and things in the report that show this, but there will be quite a bit of separation between the bottom of those ponds and the top of the water table in that area. Under the CCR rule, they want a minimum of 5 feet. And in the case of the 3 and 4 ponds, we had, I can't even remember the exact, it was well over 5 feet. So after the capture and injection system turns off, the water level below the ponds actually decreases quite a bit. And so for that reason, if, implementing these measures to dewater all the pore water within those ponds, and then of course they will eventually be capped with plastic liners, once the ponds are closed. Putting those measures in prevents future seepage. And so for that reason, we were able to obtain, a source control method there while leaving those ponds in place.
Thank you.
And Gordon, hopefully I covered that. If you've got anything to add, feel free to chip in.
No, you covered it well. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. All right. I don't see anybody else with a raised hand, so I will go ahead and share my screen. But again, we'll have some time at the end to go back through these. So, okay, so just going back to the agenda. So we just finished the Unit 3 and 4 Remedy Evaluation Report overview. So moving on, I'm going to take it from here. And I will first start going through the Units 1 and 2 remediation plan. And I'll give a better description of what that is. So the Coal-Fired Generating Unit Remediation Act, MCA 75-8-101 through 109. The remediation plan was a requirement of this act. So this is separate from the Colstrip AOC that I explained earlier. And okay, so there is a link in here if you downloaded the slides on our website. You can click the link, but that just gives all the language for this act. So this was passed in the 2017 legislative session, and it requires the Colstrip owners to submit a remediation plan within 90 days of unit shutdown. And so since units 1 and 2 shut down January 2nd and 3rd of 2020, Talon submitted those plans within 90 days of that shutdown date. So the purpose of this plan was to provide remediation information for items that weren't covered under the AOC. So our AOC really only addresses contamination that's related to coal ash, so primarily groundwater contamination from the pond seepage. The AOC was not designed to cover items like solid and hazardous waste, petroleum releases, asbestos, and just other items related to plant operation. So this act provides a kind of comprehensive remediation plan that covers all aspects of remediation, including those that would be related to actual plant closure. So this document is currently out for public comment. The public comment period ends on November 2nd, and I have a slide toward the end of the presentation that explains how to submit public comments. And this plan is also available on DEQ's Colstrip website, so that link that Rebecca posted in the chat there. So I apologize, these slides are a little bit wordy, but these slides kind of cover the main points of the remediation plan. So just kind of a general overview. So due to safety and other considerations related to operation of units 3 and 4, the demolition and removal will be deferred until after units 3 and 4 are retired. It's just hard to take down stacks and things like that when you've got 3 and 4 operating so close to the units 1 and 2 buildings, and so for safety reasons, those will remain in place. But Talon will conduct periodic inspections of the units 1 and 2 buildings, and they'll maintain safe conditions in those buildings. The anticipated future use of this land in the plant area would continue to be industrial, and all the remediation measures will comply with 75-8-107. So that's part of the Coal-Fired Generating Unit Remediation Act. It's a mouthful. And that part requires contractors and subcontractors to use a skilled and trained workforce and pay the standard prevailing rate of wages. So getting into a little more detail on this, some of the items that are covered in this remediation plan include universal wastes. So those are things like lamps, light bulbs, mercury devices, batteries, and electronic waste. Quantities have been identified already, and they will be disposed of in accordance with the administrative rules of Montana. And so generally speaking, all of these wastes I'm going to cover in the next few slides kind of already have rules, either on the state or the federal level, or both, that cover how to dispose of these properly. So for asbestos, asbestos-containing materials and presumed asbestos-containing materials will be removed prior to any demolition per EPA regulations, and they will be identified by a licensed asbestos contractor as part of the demolition contract. Any identified material would be removed by a certified contractor and disposed of in a certified landfill. And Talon has already completed an asbestos survey, and all these are available in detail in the remediation plan. But Talon has completed an asbestos survey, and over the last 10 years of operation, some asbestos-containing materials have already been identified and removed. But Talon will continue to identify those as they go through the demolition process. So other regulated material, including hazardous material. So big list of possibilities here, I guess, but includes lubricating oils, hydraulic oils, non-PCB transformer oils, fuel and waste oil, fire extinguishers, refrigerants, devices containing small amounts of nuclear material. So things like exit signs and smoke detectors sometimes contain a little bit of nuclear materials, coal handling density gauges. So the initial site recon identified products containing hazardous substances, and these will be tracked and disposed of per applicable waste regulations. And so more details on kind of quantities and things like that are available in the remediation plan. And Talon has also put together kind of an example tracking sheet that would be used to track all of those wastes. So PCB wastes. So these are regulated under the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, with the US EPA having regulatory authority. Potential materials at Colstrip that could have PCBs include fluorescent lighting ballasts and high-intensity discharge fixtures, small transformers, capacitors and ballasts, oil, and building materials such as caulk, glazing, and paint. And so materials that could potentially have PCB in them would be sampled and properly disposed of if they're determined to contain PCBs. And that's all regulated again under the US EPA authority, the TSCA. And so finally, petroleum releases. So there are 2 known petroleum release sites in the units 1 and 2 area affiliated with those units. And so I put the facility IDs and the release numbers up here. So the first one is located near the current units 1 through 4 buildings and grounds crew building. So this was a previous location of mobile equipment that fueled underground storage tanks. And the hydrocarbon plume is stable. No migration has been observed, and potential for migration is minimal. And I should say petroleum releases are handled with Montana DEQ's petroleum tank cleanup section, and that starts from the minute they're identified pretty much. So these releases are being handled under a separate section already. And there's more details about remediation actions and things that have been done for these in this remediation plan. So the second facility, or the second petroleum release identified, is just north of Unit 1. It's the previous location of Units 1 and 2 turbine lube underground pipeline. Underground piping and associated soil were removed in 1990. 18 wells have been installed and monitored since then, and no migration has been detected. Free product has been observed at 3 wells, and 1 well exceeds state standards. Again, this is being handled under DEQ's petroleum tank cleanup section. There's a few other smaller releases that have been found, but they're within the footprint of those 2 identified releases that I just went through. So they're being addressed as part of those releases. And then finally, there is a clause in the remediation plan that addresses just the potential of unknown petroleum releases that could be identified in the future, you know, as buildings get taken down and things like that. So Talon will comply with the state regulations to address anything that gets identified in the future. Okay, so the remediation plan that I just kind of summarized, it does address the ash pond remediation by referencing the AOC documents, specifically this Units 1 and 2 Integrated Remedy Evaluation Report. And so I'm going to kind of transition into talking about the ash pond remediation in these next few slides. In the meantime, I can pause if anyone has questions about those items I just covered under the remediation plan. Let's see, I don't see anybody. Rebecca, do you see any raised?
Nope, I don't see anyone.
Okay. Well, again, we'll have time at the end, so. Okay, so circling back to our AOC Administrative Order on Consent, I'm going to go through the Units 1 and 2 Remedy Evaluation Report. So this was submitted by Talon to DEQ on September 4th. It is currently under review by DEQ, and I'll give an overview of that report, including the descriptions of the alternatives presented. And again, this is, we are soliciting public comments on this report as well right now. That public comment period goes through October 26th. And one of my last slides, I again have details on how to submit public comments if you want to do that. So I'll give a little background on the history of this report. The Units 1 and 2 remedy evaluation has actually been split into 2 parts. I had mentioned previously that we did have some financial assurance for this area already, and so this is why. So Talon submitted a Part 1 report last spring, and we DEQ conditionally approved that report in June. And so that Part 1 report addresses existing groundwater contamination from historical pond seepage. The Part 2 report, which is kind of also referred to as the integrated report, and so those 2 terms are interchangeable, but that addresses source control options for the ponds. And I'll get into more details on these 2 parts of the report in the following slides, but this split report style was done because it became evident that these ponds are more complex than we initially thought, which makes, of course, the remedial alternatives more complex. Splitting the report allowed DEQ to approve parts of the remedy that would need to be implemented just regardless of whatever option we select for source control. And again, I'll get into more detail on the following slides, but in turn that also allowed us to get some of the financial assurance for this area as well. So a quick overview of kind of what's going on in this area so everyone is familiar with it. The Units 1 and 2 ponds, there's 2 sets of ponds there. So there's the Stage 1 pond, and those are the original ponds that serviced Units 1 and 2 constructed in the 1970s. And those were full, and they were closed in 2002 by placing an evapotranspiration cap, or a soil cap with vegetation on the top. So that was placed in 2002. That pond is partially clay lined on the bottom, but it does not have the HDPE plastic liners that we see on the current ponds today. The Stage 2 ponds operated from the early 1990s until the units closed in this last January. Those ponds are all lined with the HDPE plastic liners. So the groundwater elevation in this area is going to remain above the bottom elevation of the ponds. And that's kind of what makes this area a little more complicated. As I kind of talked about in the Units 3 and 4, we had good evidence that there's going to be a lot of separation between the bottom of those ponds and groundwater into the future, permanently. That's not the case at these ponds, and so we kind of had to take a different approach with these ponds. So just quickly going through the area here. So the Stage 1 ponds, hopefully you guys can see my mouse. I'm kind of tracing the outline, but it's basically the area with no trees. It's kind of a funny shape. But this is the stage 1 pond here. So that's the one that was closed with that soil cap in 2002. And then these here are the stage 2 ponds. And so as you can see, there's 5 ponds that make up the stage 2. And there are dams running along right here. So along the, would that be the northeast side of the stage 1 pond. And then there's another dam along the northeast side of the stage 2 ponds. And then of course, Castle Rock Lake is kind of in this bottom corner here. So going through the hydrogeology of this area, because it's kind of important to understand what the groundwater is doing in this area to understand the remediations or the various remedial alternatives that are being proposed. So generally speaking, groundwater flows to the east, northeast, and so as you can see indicated by these arrows here. It is locally influenced by capture units. So there are capture wells already operating in this area, and they do influence the groundwater flow in that area. This is from one of the shallower units. And so generally speaking, shallower units tend to mimic the surface topography a lot closer. So you'll see a little more local variations in the shallower units. Once you get down into the deeper aquifers, the groundwater flow becomes much more uniform, and it's just a more general northeasterly direction in those deeper units. I'll also point out that the groundwater here is also influenced by Castle Rock Lake. And as you can see, the groundwater flows away from that lake because it's kind of built in a high point. So because the groundwater flows away from the lake isn't and would never be impacted by these ponds here because the groundwater flow just doesn't go that direction. And these maps are created by measuring water levels at hundreds of wells that are strategically placed throughout these areas, some of which are capture wells, but there are some wells that are for monitoring as well. So I'll go through the contaminants of concern in these areas, or in this area. And so this was identified through that cleanup criteria and risk assessment report. And so these are all constituents that were not screened out in that report and we ended up developing cleanup standards for. And so generally the cleanup levels are either the DEQ7 standard, which is actually only the case for selenium, that's the only one that has a DEQ7 standard, or the EPA regional screening level, or the background level, based off of that background screening level report that I talked about a few slides ago. Some of these constituents have somewhat limited data because they weren't previously monitored under the AOC. So we had a pretty thorough list of constituents we were monitoring under the AOC. But when the federal rule came out, the federal CCR rule, that had really specific requirements for monitoring as well. And so there were some constituents that got added to the monitoring network in addition to installing some additional wells. And of course, that wasn't required. That rule didn't go into place until 2015. So for things like, actually, I think really it's just cobalt and lithium in this area. We don't have as much data on those just because we weren't collecting data on those prior to 2015. So we're going to be working with Talon to update their water resources monitoring plan, which is site-wide. It goes for all of the ponds, to add those constituents to the regular monitoring schedule. So we'll be getting more data into the future on those. So circling back to the actual remedy evaluation report, this is the portion that was approved by DEQ, or conditionally approved by DEQ, I should say, in June 2020. We did solicit public comments on this report. And so this part 1 report, again, was designed to address existing groundwater contamination. And so it consists of a groundwater capture combined with a freshwater injection system. So it's much like what Gordon explained for the units 3 and 4 area. With the idea being that the capture wells, get that stuff out of the groundwater, and the freshwater injection wells help mobilize some of those more stubborn contaminants to allow them to get captured by that capture system. And so we found this really speeds up the remediation timeframe for the groundwater. So I should just note here, it also includes dewatering A cell, E cell, and the old clear well. So those are 3 of the ponds that are part of the stage 2. And so there would be dewatering wells installed in those to get rid of poor water that's held within the ash in those ponds. So with this, I just want to note that the reason that we went ahead and approved these is these are measures that would happen no matter what happens with the ponds, whether they stay or they get excavated. These actions would have to happen no matter what. I mean, even if we dug out all the ponds tomorrow, we'd still have to deal with the groundwater contamination that's in place from, the seepage that's happened, since the ponds were first built. So that's why we went ahead and approved these measures. And with that, we secured an additional $16 million of financial assurance. Okay. So moving into the Units 1 and 2 Integrated Remedy Evaluation Report, or it's also referred to as the Part 2 report. So this builds on the measures that were approved in the Part 1 report with the addition of various measures to address source control. So just to kind of clarify what I mean by source control. So you'll recall I mentioned that the bottom of the ponds in this area will remain in contact with groundwater. So this means that the ponds could act as an ongoing source of contaminants to groundwater into the future. So when I say source control, what I mean is we're addressing that pond groundwater contact to prevent future contamination. So this process started with Talon and DEQ screened through a really large list. I think we started with 18 or 20 different alternatives to address source control. We kind of went through this list throughout spring 2020. And in the end, the screening process narrowed down the list to 4 alternatives. And so this integrated report provides in-depth analysis of those 4 alternatives, and it also identifies Talon's preferred alternative. And so just recall, all of these alternatives are in addition to those remedy components that were approved in Part 1 report. So that capture well system along with the freshwater injection wells, those are going to go in no matter what. So the first of the 4 alternatives is alternative 6A. And this consists of closing and capping the stage 2 ponds. And I know these figures are a little busy, so I'll just call out a few features on here. But closing and capping the stage 2 ponds in place. So that's these ponds over here. They would be capped with federal CCR rule compliant geomembrane caps. So geomembrane, geosynthetic, they're all kind of terms for plastic lined caps. The stage 1 pond, it was closed in 2002 with that soil cap. And so alternative 6A replaces that cap on the stage 1 pond with a CCR rule compliant geomembrane cap. So it would put a plastic lined cap on that stage 1 pond. And again, the capture injection system would operate through 2050. Talon would still dewater. So it's A cell is right here, E cell, and then the old clear well is kind of in this corner here. So basically these ponds kind of in the center here would be dewatered as well. So the next alternative is alternative 7C. And so this alternative includes excavating and relocating all the ash in the stage 1 pond. So again, this pond right here, the one with soil cap. And recall, this pond also doesn't have plastic liners on the bottom either. And so alternative 7C excavates and relocates all of that ash to a new lined landfill on Talon property. And so Talon has picked out an area, it's a general area, but it is on Talon property of where that new landfill would potentially be located. It would be about 42 acres and a total of 2.7 million cubic yards of ash would be moved from the stage 1 pond. The stage 2 ponds over here would be closed and capped in place, again with those plastic lined CCR rule compliant caps. And in addition to that, there would be a gravity drain installed below the stage 2 ponds. So that's this big blue line that kind of runs along the axis of these ponds here. And so what that gravity drain does, it would there wouldn't be pumps operating for that into perpetuity. The gravity drain would be designed so that it would naturally collect water in that drain. And what that does is it lowers the water table to below the bottom of the ponds. So it would get them in compliance, you know, in terms of eliminating that bottom of the pond contact with the groundwater. Again, the installation of the capture wells, capture and injection wells would still occur. That system would be some of those wells, I should say, would be postponed until the excavation is complete, just for logistics of, you know, installing the wells within the excavation area. So some of those wells would need to wait until 2028 when that excavation has been completed to install those. And I should say too, with the gravity drain, there's no pump that there still would be maintenance done on that drain. You know, it would be cleaned out and things like that to make sure it doesn't clog up, you know, into the future. So alternative 10 is the total excavation option. And so alternative 10 consists of excavating and relocating all of the ash in all of the ponds in this area to a new lined landfill on Talon property. And so again, that landfill in the same general area, it's obviously bigger than the last one because there's more ash. So that would be a total of 6.7 million cubic yards of ash, plus 2 million cubic yards of dam material. So these dams, the stage 1 dam is here and the stage 2 dam is here. Those would be removed and the soil would be sampled. Talon just assumed when they were discussing this alternative that the dam material would need to be disposed of, similar to how the ash is going to be disposed of. But there is the chance that, you know, they'd sample the dam material and it wouldn't be contaminated and they wouldn't have to put it in the new impoundment. But just to be conservative, Talon assumed that 2 million cubic yards would go in this new landfill. So the new landfill would be approximately 91 acres. And then the footprint of the original stage 1 and stage 2 ponds would be reclaimed with some stormwater controls and things like that. So the fourth alternative is alternative 11. And so this is a partial removal scenario of the ash in the stage 1 and stage 2 ponds. And so in this scenario, all ash within 5 feet of the high water table would be excavated and relocated within the existing pond footprint. So I've got an image on the next slide that shows this a little better, but the ash from stage 1 that is within 5 feet of that high water table would be relocated within that stage 1 pond. A cell, which is in the stage 2 pond, that ash would be relocated to the stage 1 pond. And then E cell and the old clear well in the stage 2 pond, that would be relocated to D cell, which is another area in the stage 2 ponds, and just it would be, those would remain within other parts of the stage 2 ponds, basically. And then of course, after everything's been relocated, the stage 1 and stage 2 ponds would be capped and closed with those geosynthetic plastic caps. So this figure will hopefully clear some of that up because I know it's a lot of information. So A cell is right here. And so A cell, most of that ash would be relocated into the stage 1 pond here. E cell is here, and the old clear well is here. And most of that ash would get moved into D cell right here. And so D cell was constructed in 2000, trying to think of the date now, but in the 2000s. It's one of the more recent ponds that was constructed. It was designed to hold ash, and Talon just ended up not needing it once units 1 and 2 shut down. So there isn't currently any ash in D cell. And I should explain too, the way the bottom of these ponds work, they were constructed in sort of a drainage. And so these ponds don't have flat bottoms. So it's not, the entire bottom of these ponds isn't submerged in groundwater. There's only portions of it. And because it was constructed in a drainage, it's kind of the center portions. And so you can see the blue dashed outline here. And so that's kind of the ash that we're looking at that would be in contact with groundwater, or that portion of the bottom of the pond would be in contact with groundwater into the future. So for that reason, D-cell, even though it's in this area, it's actually well above the water table. And so, ash could be moved into that cell. So a total of 1.1 million cubic yards would be relocated in stage 1. So that's kind of this section here. 3.7 million cubic yards of ash would be relocated from the stage 2 ponds. And so you might be thinking, well, it doesn't look like there's that much ash, that needs to be removed. It's just this section here, but you have to remove all the ash, of course, that's on top of the stuff that's going to be in contact with groundwater. And then you have to go out kind of to the sides to maintain, slope stabilities and make sure, the sidewalls don't collapse during removal. So there's a little more to it than just, simply, removing that ash in contact with groundwater. There is other ash that would need to come out. And so that's why there's so much being relocated. So Talon does identify their preferred alternative in this report. So based on the metrics that were evaluated by Talon, and these metrics include the date that cleanup criteria are attained, the date of being able to implement the capture and injection system, the environmental risk and impact, and cost effectiveness. So based on those metrics, alternative 10 was determined to perform the best by Talon. However, DEQ has stated that we're not going to approve a remedy that leaves a long-term source in contact with groundwater. And so if you'll recall, alternative 6A does leave all those ponds in place. So as a result of that, Talon is proposing alternative 11, which is that partial excavation scenario, as its preferred remedy. And DEQ is currently reviewing the report, and we're evaluating all the alternatives. The public comment period is currently in progress through October 26th. And at the conclusion of that public comment period, DEQ will look through all the public comments, and we'll be finalizing, our comments, and we will determine a remedy, the remedy that DEQ will select at the end of that public comment period. So here's just the logistics slide on these public comment periods. So the AOC has a 30-day public comment period on the reports. And so, as I said, that the comment period for the remedy evaluation report ends October 26th. That coal-fired generating unit remediation act requires a 45-day public comment period on the plan. And so that one ends November 2nd. And then I just got contact information here on how to submit public comments. And I can leave this slide up at the end too. Actually, I think I have another slide with my information on it. But so we'll take them digitally, or you can mail them to us as well. So I'll just quickly go through what's next. We're actually kind of getting toward the end of this AOC process, which is exciting. So approval of a remedy for the units 1 and 2 ponds will trigger the financial assurance requirement. And this is the final piece of the financial assurance. So after that, we'll have all the financial assurance in place, which is great. The remedial design documents will be submitted for the units 3 and 4 ponds and the 1 and 2 ponds. And so, these of course provide the really detailed design specifications and engineering drawings and things like that for the selected remedies. The 30% design has already been submitted for the 3 and 4 area, but there's more to come with that design. And then of course the remedies will be implemented, and once those get going, Talon will submit annual progress reports to DEQ, and we'll be reading those through and making sure that the remedies are performing like the model says they will. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and so we'll open it up for comments and questions now, and Rebecca's going to help me how to moderate this, and I'm going to go back to that public comment period slide just so it's up there. But.
Yeah, so thanks, Sarah. That was a great presentation. In this part of the meeting, we want to hear from you. As Sarah mentioned, we are currently seeking public comments on both of the reports that she discussed tonight. And we're interested in hearing whether you have comments to share tonight or questions on the presentations. If you would like to make a comment tonight or ask a question, Like I said at the beginning, we'd ask that you raise your hand, and you would do that by clicking the reactions button on your screen and clicking the raise hand. If you're joining us by phone, if you called in, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And before we get into any of the questions or comments, I just want to remind folks that we are recording the meeting tonight. So if that factors into your desire to speak, just know that we are recording. And I would ask that just to make sure that the folks on the phone know who's speaking, when we do call on you and unmute you to speak, if you could state your name and your organization or affiliation if applicable. It looks like Representative Dunwell had a question in the chat. She's asking why not do alternative 10 if it is indeed the most protective.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, you know, alternative 11 is Talon's identified alternative. So DEQ has not selected a remedy yet. So we haven't made any decisions on, you know, which alternative we're going to select. And we are taking public comments into account on this. The reasons behind Talon's selection of alternative 11, you know, a big factor with that is just keeping the ash in one place. And so rather than having to construct a new landfill in, we call it a green field, but essentially an undisturbed area, kind of the big benefit to alternative 11 is we keep that ash within that same footprint. And so we're not, Talon would, you know, there wouldn't be any risk of impacting a new area. So that was a pretty big factor in Talon's selection of alternative 11. And there were some other things that went into that too. You know, Talon looked at job creation potential, and again, they looked at how quickly they could implement the capture and injection system. The excavation process is shorter in alternative 11, and so those capture and injection wells can go in a little faster than alternative 10. And so you kind of see the results of cleaning up that existing groundwater plume a little quicker in alternative 11 versus alternative 10. But again, we're still evaluating the report, so no decisions have been made on this yet.
Any other questions?
Hi, this is Alex Cunha with Northern Plains Resource Council.
Okay.
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, so I just unmuted myself.
Sure, no problem.
I had a question from a Northern Plains member, Nick Golder, who wasn't able to make this meeting tonight. And he just wanted to know if, for the landfills that would be newly constructed to store excavated ash from the 1 and 2 ponds, if the bottom liner would include bentonite, and then I assume there would be a plastic liner on the bottom, but he was wondering, you know, as plastic does have a lifetime on it, if bentonite would be included, as that kind of, you know, would last forever, ideally.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the new impoundments, I should clarify too, the new ponds would be constructed in an area where the bottom of the pond would be at least 5 feet above the water table, which is kind of the whole point of moving the ash. But in reference to what the liners on the bottom would be, they would follow the coal combustion residual rule guidelines. So the federal CCR rule, and they have pretty prescriptive liner requirements for both the bottom and the top liners. And I don't think it specifically calls for bentonite, but it does call for soil, and then I think there's a double plastic liner on it. And I'll have to go back and double check those CCR rule regulations, but it would be in accordance with that. Again, it's a pretty prescriptive liner system that the federal rule requires.
Thank you. And then I had one more question from a member. which was, does Talon intend to use the local workforce for all these jobs? Has that been decided yet? Or I guess, is that something that will be included at a later stage of the AOC process?
Yeah, so it's not outlined in the remedy evaluation reports where the workforce would come from. DEQ certainly supports maintaining the local workforce. The AOC doesn't have any requirements for it, so DEQ doesn't have any regulatory authority to require that. But yeah, I think that would be determined maybe a little later in the process, getting more into the design and the specifics of how many jobs would be created through the various alternatives and things.
Thank you.
Thought I saw another raised hand, but it disappeared on me.
I'm not seeing any raised hands, but if other folks are having trouble raising their hand, I think at this point, I would encourage folks, if they want to speak, they can go ahead and unmute themselves. If you are joining on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute.
I'm getting little notifications, but then I'm not. Maybe if I stop screen sharing. I can always screen share.
We do have one now.
Okay.
Elaine O'Donnell, see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Well, actually, it's her phone, but this is Public Service Commissioner Tony O'Donnell. And I know all of you at DEQ are familiar with the plan of Mr. David White for elimination of the CCRs, and I understand that there's a long process involved in this, and I'm just wondering what level of consideration that plan is to completely eliminate the CCRs instead of just moderating them and controlling them.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, DEQ stance on this is, we support beneficial reuse, and if that ash can be reused in a way that eliminates this groundwater ash contact, then we're fully in support of that. That being said, as far as our AOC process goes, the way that works is, Talon submits kind of a range of alternatives that DEQ selects from. And so currently, that hasn't been included in any of the alternatives. And so it's not something that we're necessarily going to approve right now just because it's not in those alternatives. But, the AOC process was meant to be adaptable. And so, if this technology, if Talon wants to use this technology in the future, then, we'd certainly support that, and we can modify the remedy, if needed to accommodate for that beneficial reuse.
Well, thank you for that. I have your presentation was amazing. I had numerous questions that I can't ask because they would violate ex parte of a commission member, because it may come up in the plan for Northwestern to acquire more Colstrip 4. So it's very frustrating. Yes, I have these great questions, but they'll have to come in a formal setting rather than this. So thank you very much.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I am not seeing other hands, Sarah.
We'll give it just a minute, just in case people need a minute to think. It was a lot of information.
You did such a good job presenting it that you answered all of the questions.
Maybe.
Also feel free to type their questions or comments into the chat box if that's easier.
And, again, we're taking public comments through the 26th, and I'm happy to answer questions, at any time. So, even if you don't want to submit a comment, if you're looking through the report and you're confused about something and you just want clarification, feel free to contact me. Actually, maybe I'll put, I do maintain that DEQ Colstrip email address, so it would get to me, but I try to reserve those for public comments so as to not overwhelm my own inbox. But this is my my direct email address here. And so if you have questions that you want to ask me directly, you can email me there. All right, well, it is 8:28. I had it scheduled until 8:30, so actually that timing works out pretty well. If there are no more questions.
I'm not seeing any more questions, so I think we can probably call it. I want to just thank everyone again so much for joining us. I know Zoom can be really challenging sometimes, so really appreciate everyone bearing with us. And thank you so much, Sarah and Gordon, for the presentations. It was a lot of information. We're really looking forward to reviewing all the comments that you send. Hopefully you know how to send them. I posted that information in the chat box. It's also in the slides Sarah went through tonight. And then you can also go to the DEQ public comment page to find that information as well. So we look forward to hearing from you. And I hope you all stay healthy and stay warm because it's getting cold out there.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And yes, feel free to contact me with any questions or concerns.